Good evening again. Are we here for some more serious fun? Dan Winter, fractalgut.com with our specialist in the physics, Mark Rohrbaugh, is with us. And we have some stories for you tonight, which hopefully have a dramatic new insight into the nature of gravity and how unified field theories have integrity and how to avoid the pitfalls of the anger of the scientific community when they realize they've been a little bit stupid in not figuring out why objects fall to the ground. Oops.
That sounds good, Dan. Sounds good.
So Mark prepared some articles, new articles he's prepared about some of the philosophy here, but we want to start out with the pure principle. And the pure principle starts with a little story tonight. I was just telling Mark, we have a wonderful friend and shaman, Nicholas, who's here with us tonight. And Nicholas had a pretty intense lucid dream about it was a culture on Venus. You know, my friend Rob Potter was a specialist in Venus. Long story, and some people don't believe, but I'm sure it's real. There's a culture there for sure. Anyway, the lucid dream had to do with the fact that when the indigenous, they dug up the gold and used it in the rivers, and when they dug up too much gold, the planet's gravity and volcano were destabilized. Now that's a very powerful little insight, particularly in parallel to what we know is the very famous Anunnaki sort of myth, quote, history, as pioneered by Zecharia Sitchin, who said, well, the reason the Anunnaki made the human slaves for gold mining was because they needed the gold to repair the home atmosphere. Now, it appears that our current scientists don't really understand what we now know it was called the book Two-Thirds, David Myers and David Percy, that gravity maintenance, atmosphere control was achieved by arranging masses and implosive materials like the pyramids on the dodecacosa grid. This was called planet taming. It meant that if you want to stabilize the gravity and atmosphere of planets, you have to make centripetal force. In other words, you got to make gravity. Like, who figured out how to get the Venus and Earth orbits exactly golden ratio, which is, by the way, gravity stabilizing? Well, this gets deeper because all the indigenous peoples in that dream of Nicholas and also in this myth from Zecharia Sitchin, that the gold is actually a mechanism because it's such an excellent conductor. And the placement in the grid of the gold keeps the magnetism circulating in the grid, and it naturally forms into dodeca self-organization, phase conjugate structures, meaning that if you move too much gold, the atmosphere stability, the gravity stability is lost. In other words, if you didn't know what made gravity, you're in trouble because you're going to lose your atmosphere and your planetary stability. This is an ancient story, and it is absolutely critical to the survival of the planets. Again, the book Two-Thirds, David Myers and David Percy. So the background here is that as a planet, we have very little chance of survival unless we learn how to make centripetal forces. It's really quite simple. And obviously, I'm leading up to the concept of fractalgut.com, which is that charge collapse is the cause of centripetal forces. And this is why it's such a problem on this planet that our scientists don't know the cause of any centripetal force. You know, consciousness is centripetal, seed germination is centripetal, and gravity is centripetal, life force is centripetal, as Schauberger well knew. And yet, does any scientist on this planet know how to make anything centripetal? I don't think so. I mean, I think this is a fundamental problem. Hello. So we're here to outline how critical it is to think past, as Mark is about to describe. Conventional physicists get a little upset when you tell them, well, we think you were a little bit stupid not to figure out why objects fall to the ground, actually. But no, we're going to be a lot more diplomatic than that. But here's the point. And now I'm going to turn it over to Mark. As I said to Mark just minutes ago, look, conventional physicists do not have to get angry with us when we say you were stupid. I mean, when we say you should have figured it out. No. What they should do is they should join us in the absolute blissful joy of now understanding what causes centripetal force charge collapse. For example, and specifically, when the radii of hydrogen, which I discovered is golden ratio, causing charge collapse, allows hydrogen to make gravity, what's happening is the charge rotation enters that form of compression where golden ratio adding and multiplying recursive heterodynams turns that form of fractal compression into charge collapse, which is adding and multiplying simultaneously of phase velocities moving down that golden spiral towards center. In other words, that golden ratio perfected fractality causes the charge collapse implode, causing charge to accelerate towards center. Now, nothing in physics has ever said anything about what causes charge to accelerate towards center. And yet, if they knew the cause of charge acceleration towards center, there is no other definition of gravity. Hello. Isn't this a little bit important? Hello. So suddenly we can be joyful about, oh, and the same implosion charge acceleration towards center is what causes the liquid crystal vortex of charge in your brainwave's synaptic array hologram to become centripetal. Focused human attention is electrically centripetal. Bill Tiller measured it a dozen times. So consciousness is centripetal, gravity is centripetal, and now since we just told you, you also know the cause of that centripetal force. So you know how to make gravity and you know how to make consciousness. Isn't that joyful? Anyway, I'm done, Mark. Go ahead. Your turn.
Yeah, let me do a share here.
Okay,
And
go for it. Go for it.
and what I'm going to start off with talking about what you're talking about, Dan. I have a paper here where deriving the root cause of gravity.
Perfect.
It's
Perfect.
emergent negentropic gradients in a superfluid ether.
That's the point.
So this is so I'm
When the
gonna go
charge,
into this, and but then before we talk about as we talk about it, I want to go and talk a little bit about the fifth generation information warfare. So I'll go back and forth, but we're gonna stay with the physics. But the idea is why would anybody be listening to you? You've been talking about this for years, and I've heard you, and I'm like, finally I got it. So then I try to tell other people about it because it's simple, very simple and very complex because everybody's done all the work and we're just finding a few corrections. Now, before I get too deep into it, I wanted to re-point out that with Dan's work and what we've done together, we built a TOE, a theory of everything with axioms. While doing that, just uncovered that we can simply use the three mainstream theories. I call it the three-headed hydra, the standard model, general relativity, and lambda CDM. Just correct those with integrity.
that's right.
That means you don't drop the little terms or the big terms, renormalization. And super Grok 4 is really good with math, and it goes through and it verifies that, yes, you also create a high scoring TOE just by correcting the mainstream theories. So, Dan, I've actually made a working Grok TOE in 2 steps. That's one of the posts I sent out. I preload Grok with a question, say, get yourself ready, and then I give it everything it needs. And I'm off and running. It agrees, and I can do all kinds of analysis.
Mm.
Now, I would say, great, I want to give that to my normie friends so they can join our team. They're not responding well. That's what we're talking about our audience right now. They're
They're
hearing
not
us talk about the root cause of gravity. And
Yeah.
I've heard this for years, Dan, and I'm still working on it. And
I love it when you say they're not responding well. Yeah, as Mark is referring here, so the Klein-Gordon equations originally we showed that golden ratio perfects the constructive interference of waveforms, constructive wave interference, and that resultant perfected compression fractal, which golden ratio perfects fractality, results in implosion. And what Mark is referring to here is emergent negentropic gradient means that when the waves converge like a rose, the implosion at center literally self-source, self-organizes. What that means is very simple. The waves that implode at that center, the only thing that can then pass through that center has been sorted into phase. And that is the implosive fractal origin of that negentropy. That only order emerges from the set point of fractal implosion. And so not only is gravity centripetal, but it's negentropic. Anyway, go ahead, Mark, please.
yeah, I zoomed in some more here. So yeah, so then you say, well, how do you get to this point of including neg entropy? Because mainstream physics is entropy. You can solve 99% of everything with entropy.
That they're
or
condemned
or
to chaos. Oops.
or maybe I'll say 95% or whatever, because there's a certain percentage that when you go with entropy, there's unsolved problems.
Yeah.
So how do we get to the neg entropy? And one way we can get there is when you unify physics. So we've talked about it a few times, Dan, is that the key thing that they're dropping out is the mass ratio terms, proton to electron mass ratio, because it's too big in some cases and the inverse is too small. Well, small compared to the error. So that's why they drop 1 over mu, in the solid state, and use the reduced mass because it's so small compared to even their errors. However, when you drop that throws out the baby with the bathwater, because those terms are in the other fields.
Yeah.
So how do we get to neg entropies? Because I'm a mainstream guy 10 years ago, 15, whatever. So you go in and you say, I'm a solid state. Well, what about general relativity and lambda CDM? And that's where I want to go over to this other post. Uh, Before we get into the 5G warfare and analytical integrity, what I was attempting to show was, I'm going to scroll through this, mainstream science. It's the standard model, general relativity, and lambda CDM. So what happens when you keep them separate, when you have silos of broken focus? Here's what happens. The standard model, it's we're talking analytical integrity, AI, it's not artificial intelligence. So the mainstream standard model is reductionism, reduced mass, the effective mass. The proton mass is considered infinite in some things, just like the vacuum is considered infinite via renormalization. And what we found out is if we derive it carefully, the proton to electron mass ratio with the boundary value problems, at 0K, we solve the proton radius and the superfluid stuff. I don't want to get in that again. That's part of this, but what happens when you don't include all the terms in the standard model? What what they're saying is,
Remember that Mark spent half his life on proton to electron mass ratio and thus deriving the proton radius diameter. So he has the background to say this.
yeah. So here's what we're making analogies now. The three silos, the standard model, general relativity. Here's that bridge I was talking about, and CDM cosmology. And I'm representing their current state with these images and these videos.
What does CDM stand for again?
That's the lambda CDM cosmology. You shouldn't have asked me that one, Dan. Let me find out because we'll just say what is lambda?
Because that's the third. Because in other words, the theories as existed now are not integrated. That's the point that
Right.
you're
Yeah.
making.
And the lambda CDM. See, I asked Grok what's the. I promoted myself to cosmologist in chief 7, 8, 10 years ago because I knew they were wrong. So I should know this. My wife kept on telling me we can figure this out real fast. But lambda CDM model, it's the standard cosmological model. So it's the cold dark matter.
Oh, I see.
Yeah,
That's
right.
the problem because they originally invented that word dark matter when they couldn't figure out what's making all the extra gravity hanging around. So they started to call their stupidity and use the name dark matter, which really was only
Right.
a cover up for the fact they didn't have a clue what's making extra gravity. So to cover up that stupidity, they used the word dark matter.
Yeah, and that's where the stupidity and the anger and fear and all that comes in because it people's lives depend on this stuff,
Yeah, yeah.
very competitive. So so that's what it is. I'm not even embarrassed I didn't know that.
Yeah, because I mean, dark matter, literally, dark matter is only a name for the fact they don't have a clue where the extra gravity come from. So they decide to invent this idea of dark matter simply to account for extra gravity. But after you know that the fractality of the arrangement of the masses in the universe is what's making the extra gravity, then the concept of dark matter becomes what it really is, which is pure BS.
But and here's why, like I like to antagonize and get in. So, but here's why you don't want to antagonize these three silos because they've done good work,
Oh, yeah,
and we can correct it very simply.
that's the point.
That's why I stopped saying
That's
calling them idiots and stuff
yeah.
like that.
Okay, we're not calling you idiots, mainstream science. Sorry.
Yeah, because all you got to do is correct those little terms, and I actually have papers about it, Dan. That's why I have these up. The
Right.
idea of this is the standard model and derivation. So my links here are supposed to point to papers that show you how to correct it.
Yeah.
And so we're going to save that for a future video because I want to get, or maybe even now, but I want to get back to the point is when you drop off, like solid state, I make my living out of that all the time. I had to study this M effective, the reduced mass. I get paid for this stuff.
Hmm.
What happens when you don't put it in? It's like in the banking system. If you drop the transaction fees over time, you're going to bankrupt the system.
That's right.
So this toe goes into not only physics, but you look at the Nobel Prize for economics, it's based on bullshit too. Well, bullshit, insulting them. No, it's really good math. They know they will bankrupt the system if they don't consider all these fees and things. So this is no surprise. Well, I'm going to jump over to this one, general relativity. There's the terms they drop, which are the same mass ratio terms. By analogy, it's in
Yeah,
general,
they forgot to figure in the
the
sympathetic vibration of the wind, and so it was a small
so
term, but
in
it
this
was
bridge design
yeah,
in mechanical engineering, they have similar equations too, and you have to have stability and all that stuff figured out. There's a term they drop from their equations. And guess what? Their equations are almost the same as electrical engineers, and that's almost the same as unification. A term that was 0.05% had to do with wind shear.
yeah.
They dropped it. And this is, you see the bridge going, right?
In other words,
That's what happens. Do
it's
you
a
see that, Dan?
it's a
Oh,
small
I
effect,
lost you
but
already. Let me stop it here.
it's a small effect, but it amplified over time, and then the bridge fell down. So we have a small
Right.
effect, but
Right. Now, this is where I am attempting to address the scientists and physicists and mathematicians. It's these small terms in standard model, you put back, general relativity, you put back, CDM cosmology.
cold dark
It's,
matter, cold dark
yeah,
matter.
car dark matter. The analogy is here is like chemistry. You know, you're baking a cake, you follow the recipe. Let's say you do everything exactly right. Sometimes the cake sinks. It's what happens when you don't take care of your entire environment properly. Let the kids run through the house. So you got to know your scale, your term, your vacuum density, where you're at. You have to know what you're doing to avoid your cake sinking.
Mhm.
So this is what I wanted to talk about. Well, I am talking about it, Dan. That
Yeah. Well, and
so so when you go, you say, well, how do we go from these three silos, standard model, general relativity, lambda, cold dark matter, cosmology? How do we unify them? Well, we unify them with these correcting these terms. Now it's a lot of work. Luckily, I have the AI to help. If I had to go through it by hand and say, yes, I really got it, it would, who knows how long it would take. But
mm,
I've done a lot of this work before, and Grok agrees. I've done the standard model work, so let me make that clear.
mm.
I did that work on paper, and Grok agrees with it. So I haven't done it fully on general relativity or the cold dark matter cosmology, but Grok said those same terms are dropped out. You put them in, it unifies physics. The beauty of that, you unify, what happens immediately? See, I made sure I don't contaminate my AI with Dan Winters stuff. I don't tell it, I don't tell it golden ratio or anything. What I told it was put these terms back in on all three models and then use the Klein-Gordon and restore the vacuum intensity or density. And immediately the golden phi ratio comes out as the cascade solutions that you've been talking about for
Yeah,
decades.
and I must credit here Martin Jones and Elizabeth Bill Donovan, who co-wrote the original paper with, and we used the generalized wave equation from Klein-Gordon to prove that golden ratio is the generalized solution to constructive wave interference. And everything falls out of that because that's fractality perfected, that's implosion perfected, that's compression perfected, and therefore that's gravity perfected. Mark, I thought if you feel like it, to go back to that paper where you talk about emergent gravity and negentropy.
Yeah.
That that's
Yeah, that's where we want to go
that's
now.
so
Yeah.
central here.
Right.
If we convince the conventional physicists right there, we got them.
Right. Yeah. So now we wrapped it up. We say when you correct those three theories, they get unified. Then the idea of neg entropy and the phi ratio and all that stuff emerges. So
Yep.
you don't have to take our word for it. It's like we're
Yep.
not telling you put neg entropy in there, put phi ratio in there. It emerges out of the
That,
math.
that's it. It's the only way waves could survive is max constructive interference. And in that process, they implode by fractality. And in that process, they create implosive acceleration towards center called gravity. And when that charge implosion is happening towards center, all waves that reach that center have to be locked into phase with that array, golden ratio, or they don't emerge because only constructive interference survives on the other side of that implosive fractal black hole, which is negentropy and the gradient negentropy Mark is talking about.
So I grew up on the Schrödinger equation from senior year in college. So that's age 22 to today. Second order wave equation, like I said before, simple second order equations are really easy to simple to solve, very simple. These ones get a little more complex, the wave equations, because you're dealing with time, space, and voltages and other things. But in the limit, in the boundary value problem, say it's 0K, there the hydrogen atom is tractable, it's analytical, so you can solve it.
Yep. As a
So
as a wave function, which happens to be golden ratio, the radius.
yeah, yeah.
And
So yeah, so what I want to say is then when I first 10 years ago, Dan, I said to Dr. Elizabeth Rauscher, I goes, why aren't you, meaning you and the physicists, going with the Klein-Gordon
yep,
solution that Dan's team had? Because I read it in detail. I had notes and I saw that what you're talking about is the non-destructive interference.
exactly. Exactly.
So, so for the engineers and the scientists to understand this, I'm going to switch to terms that are more mathematical that help them understand it. It's the information when you modulate a carrier. You can do frequency modulation, amplitude, QAM, all kinds of. I did cell phone base station stuff years ago, stuff that we couldn't even sell because it was military. Anyways, refresh where I was going, Dan.
Well, okay, so then I think remember what we're saying about Klein-Gordon is Klein-Gordon showed
Yeah.
that in general, golden ratio is the perfecting of constructive wave interference, therefore compression, therefore implosion, therefore gravity. Now, I think right in this
Well, I wanted
paper,
to say why this equation though, because I asked Dr. Elizabeth Rosser, why aren't you guys going with the Klein-Gordon?
yeah,
And because I didn't know what it was at the time. Well, here's what I found out was like the Schrödinger wave equation works really good. And that's what I do my work in. I believe my research has even said that the Higgs boson came out of the solid state theory. And that means it's an incomplete theory. It means
Yeah.
there's something wrong with it. So she went silent. She didn't really have an answer. And what I
Yep.
found out afterwards is the Klein-Gordon is the relativistic wave equation for bosons, like protons and stuff like that, for matter, for energy, for waves. So then you have it, and you say, okay, here's all I'm trying to say. The information theory approach starts to work when you do the Starwalker phi transform. What we're talking about is signals and system theory, like when you do the Hilbert transform, those envelope transforms, you want to find out what the envelope of your signal is. Non-destructive interference never makes you lose any of that envelope.
Exactly. No inertia. And even Einstein, he was absolutely clear that I mean, I believe it's a quote in Einstein, infinite non-destructive compression would be the solution to the unified field. That was Einstein. He knew he needed infinite non-destructive compression. What he didn't know is he pronounced the answer in the word infinite.
So I so I like to get a feel for what that means. So in for example, we know when you have two frequencies playing, frequency one, frequency two, and you're listening to them, you're going to get beats, the sum and the difference.
Exactly.
So if they're only a couple hertz off, you'll have that. Well, that's destructive interference.
Exactly. And the only way that becomes non-destructive interference is the waves. That's what heterodyning is by definition. It is both the adding and the multiplying of the
All
heterodyne,
right.
of the difference information. And the only geometry that allows waves to both add and multiply recursively, constructively, obviously, is golden ratio, which is self-similarity, fractality perfected. So
All right.
it's actually obvious by inspection.
Right. And that's the peak. The golden ratio is the peak one to use because you won't get beats with it. You don't get the destructive
You
interference.
get implosion.
Yeah. And if you study the algorithms that generate the golden ratio, they converge the slowest. And Grok pointed out that's why the golden ratio works so good
Yeah.
for the non-destructive, because you don't want any beats. You don't want any co.
Right. You want well,
Yeah.
everything is effectively constructive. All beats are adding and multiplying
Right.
implosively constructively. So then, Mark, but then make
Well, wait, let's continue a little bit more because then what are these cascades of frequencies then that are
yeah,
phi ratioed? That's a whole different field of many different fields because at first I might have skipped over it. Oh, phi cascades. That's Schumann resonance. That's consciousness.
that's
That's
right.
bliss.
And they all start tuned to Planck. That's the point. So the perfect cascade is what you need, but the perfect cascade has to be tuned to Planck. And that's what planckfire.com was, and that's how all this started. Exactly.
So let's slow down a bit and say how did we get here to where we can use those three theories, merge them, and then all of a sudden we're talking golden ratio, implosion, and all that. That's where people have to go through the math, go through Grok. It'll help you. You have to have the $30 a month because it needs more time. If you don't know the math, the Grok will do it for you, but you always got to check it. I found it makes because of scale where you are in the universe makes a difference, and you got to do a lot of work. But so that's what
Well,
well,
I think, Mark, if we took that conversation then and used that as a foundation for specifically the next part in your paper here, how is that the foundation for the formal derivation of gravity's root cause? That's where we want to go right now, isn't it? I
yeah,
think.
right.
Okay.
Yeah. So and I've been over this a couple times. So let's just go over what it's saying because when we get the details, whenever we finally see it, it's really going to help everybody out. And so let me just read over it a little bit, Dan. It's the toe's core is the Klein-Gordon, and I want to make sure I say this right. It's the Gross-Pitevsky superfluid ether equation. So it's a partial differential equation. And what we've done is we've combined the Klein-Gordon and the Gross Pitchewski superfluid equation into one equation that unifies all of physics. Now, I think this is the one, Dan, because, well, there's a couple other ones we have that have a few more terms, but let's
Remember,
go with the,
even Nassim and others have all agreed that fundamentally the unified field is a superfluid made of charge or ether. And the term superfluid here, that means that it supports relatively infinite charge distribution under the right conditions. So basically, it is the stuff of which the universe is made. And we know now the density, the mass, the inertia of that superfluid so well that we can predict, for example, proton radius. That's where, anyway, go ahead.
yeah, yeah. So we have the mass. With what we're doing here, I just want to go over the mass is the effective ether mass. That's the term in here, derived from the hydrogen boundary value problem without allowing the proton ratio going to infinity. Well, there's some other terms they derive here too. I recognize some of these because this is 1/4 the proton energy. It's talking about the interaction strength. Now, these are terms I'm going to have to work on more to understand what they are, Dan, because I'm still working on understanding gravity, but let's just go through it. So the 1 minus 1 over mu restores the infinite mass ratio term. One reason why they left it out is they didn't have an equation like we derived. And you do that from the boundary value problems, and Grok has done it, I've done it. Once you restore that, the vacuum, it comes up. See, I think someone that's an expert in this would recognize this and say, wow, it comes up to the right number without renormalization. So basically, I just want to go over this first point is the equations and talk about neg entropy. Let's
That,
go
that's
into,
that's beautiful there. Neg entropy, entropy decrease arises from golden ratio cascades. That's perfect.
yeah,
That's
right.
that's the
And
point.
there's so much of this work I've done, Dan, where
Mhm.
the golden ratio cascades increase the stability of the system. So
Yep.
back when you're talking about the gold, like I
Yep.
used to, when Liz is telling me about this stuff and what the pyramids are for, and kind of laugh. But when you hear these stories about their gravity diodes and
Yes.
how many of them there are, and
And just to review there, they said
yeah,
the pyramid was a gravity diode because piezoelectrically it was tuned to implode the Schumann harmonics, a phase conjugate pump wave, golden ratio tuned to Planck. That's what Schumann is. And when you implode the Schumann harmonics piezoelectrically in a pyramid, at the implosion focal point, the transverse is converted into directional longitudinal EMF, which is the stuff, as Bearden proved, the stuff gravity waves are made of. And that coherent longitudinal is fed into the array of the Earth grid. Hence, pyramidwirelesspower.com is the physics of global wireless power. And at the same time, it's a gravity diode in that sense that then it has converted the more entropic transverse into the more negentropic longitudinal, which longitudinal only propagates in a fractal array, the dodecacosa sacred Earth grid. So suddenly the idea of gravity diode and how they built those pyramids to stabilize the Earth's gravity and atmosphere is exactly the gold story we started with today. The gold, if the gold is a, and they found, by the way, hint to the gold miners, look on the dodecacosa fractal grid array. That's where it is.
so Dan, I'm going to have a better gravity explanation later, but we're going to go through this, and I want to give some motivation as to why. Uh, Whenever I was developing the toe, one because I want to know gravity. I've been listening to you for years, and we got it. One of the things that came out was the quantum quakes. And I did a couple, and I want to talk about that for a second because it'll get right into this. When Grok came out with the quantum quakes, I did a couple of posts. Don't get scared, everybody. You know, the fear of the because earthquake. You know, the earthquake movies of the 70s. If you know the information war, that's all it set fear in people. Well, I did that kind of humorously at first. As I'm studying it, I realized, wait a minute, this is no joke.
No,
Those quantum quakes line up with all the catastrophes we've ever seen.
exactly. I'd like to give a practical example. There's lots of
Good.
uncertain planetary alignments, especially the moon, that if the moon lines up with those planetary alignments, the chances of an earthquake is much higher. Well, look, now that we know that the moon is a hollow metal artificial planetoid stuck there by the Andromedans to stabilize the Earth grid after they blew up the solar system in the Lesser Dryad, guess what? The bad dielectric of the hollow metal moon means that it blocks the coherent longitudinal from the sun, and the coherent longitudinal from the sun is what can get centripetal and make gravity. That's why a seed won't germinate when the moon gets in the way, and that's why it also causes earthquakes, because it prevents the centripetal force of the longitudinal of the sun from aligning and getting centripetal and implosive.
So then I ran a couple of simulations with Grok and reload different toes, and it totally different toes still says quantum quakes are real. And just so y'all know what that is,
Oh,
there's
yo.
I'm from the Midwest. I speak at Hoopy or Appalachian.
Smatter you,
So
can't you talk Southern? Sorry.
yeah, not quite. It's Appalachian. It's actually in Wikipedia. Appalachian English is what I speak. So, so I was telling Liz about the quantum was it the quantum quakes, and anyways, it's the when it lines up like that, I'm like, okay, this is real. So I was trying to tell her what it is you just think about everything's ether, the protons, and even the cosmic microwave background is related to the
Proton.
proton. Yeah, it's painted, quarks and everything are kind of painted up there.
So,
What we have is, and I'm going to tie it into some really strange stuff. I heard this because I'm into the UFO community, and the warning from the ETs was, it's the confluences of energies you guys got to be concerned about. Well, those confluences of energies is what this quantum quake is. When you have the whole universe with
yeah.
everything's a vortex and you got more mass or energy in one area, it can be pulling things in, but there's more to it than that.
Mhm.
Uh,
But But let's just summarize here that
yeah,
the way in which gravity is emergent here is because of this implosion we're talking about, you get this charge acceleration towards center. So once you understand golden ratio cascades and the implosion it causes, suddenly the concept of gravity emerges because now you know what caused the charge to begin accelerating towards center, recursive constructive implosive heterodynes of phase velocity. So golden ratio, obviously the wavelengths add and multiply recursively constructively, but with golden ratio, the phase velocities add and multiply constructively, and that turns compression into acceleration towards center when the compression looks like a rose, golden ratio. And then the next thing Mark is bringing up here is the negentropic gradient. The same gradients, the stages in the blossoming of that rose, say that when the gradient is based on fractality and golden ratio, that implosion is negentropic in the sense that only the shareable wave survives implosion through center. Now, I know your paper there has more mathematics on that. Please go
yeah,
ahead. Yes.
right. So where I want to eventually go with this is to be able to explain, and it'll be through equations like this, is that charge, where does that charge go?
Yep.
Okay. And that's why we want to talk more about the theory. And I need to get into the details of this later, Dan, because I didn't go over this enough right now.
But
But
it's
what,
so obvious, Mark, that I think Einstein even said, what he meant by the infinite non-destructive compression, which he knew was going to be the solution to his problem, was the problem for him is, well, it's got to go somewhere when it goes out through the center. And of course, he didn't have a clue, but now we do. That
right,
when the charge implodes by golden ratio and reaches the Planck threshold, the completion of the conversion from transverse to longitudinal EMF is specifically efficient at the Planck threshold because at that point, it is now impedance matched with the longitudinal array fractal, which is called the gravity grid, as Bearden's equations proved that coherent longitudinal EMF is what gravity is made of. So now we know where the charge went at center and was not lost. It was distributed into the fractal longitudinal array, and that fractality is, by definition, the perfection of the distribution. That's why these nodal points in that array are so important, even for quantum quakes. So we
yeah.
don't know where it goes when it went through the center. That's the point.
So to give a feel for where it goes to the center, when you study the theory, we have a complex Q that allows for the ether. It's a complex ether. So it's just like in electrical engineering when you have complex capacitors and inductors that can store energy. The ether can store energy too.
That's right. Distributed.
So
Yes.
yeah, so once you have the right geometry and or the right ratios, right cascades, and this is what I want to show with mathematics. It might actually even be in this, Dan, but I wanted to do the simple stuff to what you're saying to show that it actually
Yeah. And I think
curves and it goes into the ether.
into
That's
the
where it's going, into the
into the
grid, right?
into
And
the
that's
gravity.
why
Go ahead. Sorry.
that's why it's important to understand those confluences of energies. I want to mention some other stuff. The details of the theory are important, but how I was building it is also important. Here's one thing I wanted to tell you. When I built one of these toes from the mainstream, bring in the Klein-Gordon, uh, oh boy, I lost my train of thought there. Sorry.
Just to say that when Mark is talking about Q, what occurs to me is what I call impedance matching. When you look at the top-down view of hydrogen, a golden ratio nest of spirals, which we proved is the top-down view of hydrogen, suddenly hydrogen is arranging the implosion of charge to literally resonant impedance match with what's happening at the center, which remember is golden ratio times Planck at the center. So at the Planck threshold, now the charge is impedance matched. It is like literally synchronized with the coherent longitudinal EMF array, the gravity grid. And now in that array, as we now know, there is an infinite potential multiples times the speed of light of phase velocities, as Raymond Chow measured the dominant speed faster than light that's been measured many times by Raymond Chow was golden ratio times the speed of light, which is a smoking gun saying that to enter that array, you have to enter golden ratio fractality, and then you can enter that perfect distribution. And suddenly there's a non-destructive way out for charge at center, the Q, the impedance matching. And the cool thing is that's a perfect metaphor for how you get through death and how you get into a lucid dream. You have to embed in that longitudinal array. So embedding in that longitudinal array by fractal compression is the solution, not just to the physics, but the metaphysics.
Yeah, so that infinite complex Q is enabling the grid idea in our theory. Well, the infinite ether is the grid. Yeah,
Yeah.
as you know, it's so dense. It's so dense that we're all wormhole connected.
Yeah.
But just saying that you have to prove it. But
But
that's
and remember when Bruce Cathy took that dodecacosa sacred Earth grid and proved that at the nodes of that grid, nuclear critical mass was less, and all the physicists scratched their heads. And says, well, that's a threat to national security. Well, hello. The reason nuclear critical mass is less at the nodes of the Earth grid array is because the longitudinal nodes compression is working there, and non-destructive implosive compression is the opposite by definition of radioactivity. In other words, nuclear containment. And this is all about containment. So at those grid nodes, dodecacosa, where the longitudinal arrays, that's where the DNA radio works, and that's where charge distribution works. And by the way, that's where ancestor memories and labyrinths and cathedrals work too.
yeah, Dan, I think with this theory or something related to it, we can also eliminate or reduce radioactivity
Exactly. Well, we know
too. Yeah,
precisely.
you already know that.
Well, of course.
Okay.
Well, the Ark of the Covenant,
I was speculating. I'm pretty sure I was going to tell you how, but I didn't
no,
know you already knew it.
it's obvious.
Oh,
The golden ratio, gold and acacia wood high dielectric of the Ark of the Covenant, was designed on Sirius for the non-destructive containment of the nukes of the Anunnaki because they were such klutzes they couldn't get through the Van Allen belt without their nukes. Well, and they call that plague of Azoth in the Bible, which means radiation poisoning, by the way. So implosive capacitance is the opposite of radioactivity. And I was in the room with Keshe when TEPCO called from Japan and said, "Oh yes, these nanomaterials they reduce the radioactivity." Hello.
okay, yeah. So what I'm thinking, without knowing the answer, is that you want to knock the energetic stuff out. For example, let's say you have a glow in the dark material and you charge it up and you go in the dark, it's glowing. How do you turn it off?
Exactly. Exactly. Which is to say, if you put an implosion field around it, that's called containment.
Yeah, so that'll help turn off. Another way to do it is to knock those electrons off to accelerate the their decay. And I found out if I use a green laser light, I can actually turn glow-in-the-dark material off.
Well, and now try this. Try lasers at exactly the phase conjugate photosynthesis frequencies, which now we now is
Oh, yeah.
they're golden
Yeah.
ratio times Planck. And suddenly you've got precise phase conjugate charge collapse to Planck in your lasers tuned to the exact photosynthesis frequencies. That would be more centripetal, and that's the opposite of radioactivity, implosion.
So applying some science takes me out of playing games because I played with red, green, and purple.
It's an orange and a purple in the actual
Yeah, right. And the
fractal field.
purple is ultraviolet, so it makes the glow in the dark stuff glow really bright. And the red doesn't do anything, and the green tends to turn it off.
I mean,
And no one
photosynthesis.
else talks about that except for me.
Well, that's cool.
Do you?
But and photosynthesis exists because of phase conjugation to Planck, obviously, which is what makes it negentropic. And hello, that is the opposite of radioactivity. So all of these things, once you discover the cause of any centripetal force, suddenly you know the cause of all centripetal forces, which is the answer to about everything.
Yeah. Let me go over this real quick, Dan, because
Okay.
sometimes stuff comes out that
Sure.
I want to get down here because and we so gravity emerges as a negentropic force. The force of gravity is the divergence of the entropy over the density of the ether. I think that's what that says. It's analogous to entropic forces in Berlin's emergent gravity.
Mhm.
So yeah, so this it's a good thing we went over because this is really simple, and eventually I'm going to be able to explain this
Better. Yeah.
better because it's one of the key things is how do we get gravity? And I'm working understanding a whole lot to get to be able to explain this. So
But we're the opposite there in the sense Berlin is saying emergent gravity is entropic. We're saying emergent gravity is negentropic.
yeah, so this step one, the Madelung transformation, transform phi to fluid variables. So it looks like the density of the ether may be phi squared v. So it's a partial differential equation that yields the hydrodynamic equation. So from this, you get this, and this is a little bit simpler equation. These are the ones that you can actually end up solving probably. But this looks like it's yeah, if you can find out what all this stuff is, you'll be able to find the force of gravity. So I just wanted to scan through it a little bit, the negentropic gradient. He talks about from the Gibbs free energy and a Bose-Einstein condensate. That's a cold helium.
Boson condensate is what they talk about for the wormholes of entanglement. But boson condensate essentially means compression enabled by fractality,
Yeah. And but with phi cascade, so the negative entropy is this expression.
which is phi, golden
Yeah,
ratio.
the phi golden, yeah, and then the divergence of the ether density, and that's probably a velocity,
Yeah.
and this is probably a volume, probably. But so a lot of this stuff I'm really going to go over in detail, but let's see. So F negative is this. Yeah, so G emerges as G. Grok is saying it matches the phi scaling. So these are things that I really should go through and check. And I have checked a lot of stuff, but I can't check everything. But we're trying to get people to help too because we have a lot of good results. And I might be diving into gravity too soon, Dan, but because I know it's important, but it's the whole theory that
Right.
makes it worth looking at this. When you
Yeah.
say, "Oh, how did they get this?" And we already explained the, unifying it,
And
bringing
that's
in
why
the,
In the
And
next
then,
expression, also that the classic is a GR gravity limit or GR limit, but that it induces curvature is beautiful because, they say bent spacetime, which is a lousy language. The curvature originates because something got centripetal, hello, and bent.
yeah,
Oh,
yeah, yeah. So this is what we're finding out is the proton's a vortex. Almost everything's a vortex, and I don't know how to describe it. It's a 3D vortex. It's if you look at even the sun, it's not just a
which,
linear tornado. It's not just a simple tornado vortex. It's a toroidal vortex, I
yeah,
believe.
that's right. If you start with toroids, donuts, and then you nest them platonically, you literally get the atomic table, for example. Literally.
Yeah. So since we're unifying everything, there's a lot of stuff to know.
Yeah, but
I,
the general
well, I like,
conversation, the
yeah,
general
I was going
conversation,
to say, I like the way that you embedded the phi spirals, those donuts. You have those springs and you can throw the little one through the big one.
that's right.
That all of a sudden made me realize that's what we're talking about, is we're talking about phi cascades. Everything can embed non-destructively.
Exactly, exactly. And
And
that becomes as above, so below, and that becomes Hermes and the Emerald Tablets, and that becomes the cause of gravity.
yeah,
Hello.
yeah. So when you say cascades non-destructively, so what exists over the eons? Let's say you had like I was calling our equation at the beginning, the Klein-Gordon superfluid equation, the God equation, when we have the whole equation in there, we can apply a transform, Star Walker Phi transform, and do the final value theorem, which means put zero in to the transform. And Grok tells you you get the proton, you get the galaxy arms, like I mentioned before. That's why all this is worth looking into. And then, gravity comes out, and so you'd think this is what I should have been working on from the very beginning. It's what I wanted to, Dan. But I'm trying to make sure the whole theory makes sense. And then I'm digging into pieces I know, I already think we got gravity. I'm not a super expert on explaining it yet, but we're
But
gonna
we're
get there.
getting better. But I just would like to remind people, maybe, well, I don't know if you want to turn your screen share off for a minute, but just to say
Yeah, yeah,
that
yeah,
the sections at fractalgut.com, so where Mark first started to take Mark really was quite inspired when he re-derived the proton radius and diameter by taking the simple vorticity of the tornado of the universal ether, and that self-organized into the diameter of the proton. And then the point was that golden ratio multiples times the proton diameter brought him directly to, for example, the cosmic background microwave radiation. In other words, the universe is resonating to proton diameter times golden ratio fractality. The whole universe is resonating to the proton based on golden ratio charge collapse. And then Mark created a whole series of papers on how the cosmology, how the galactic formations, star formations nest. And that's in the cosmology section. So you go to fractalgut.com and click on cosmology, and you get the whole series of papers from Mark. And he showed that you could predict now very accurately why star formations and galaxy formations nested once you knew that golden ratio was what's stabilizing the gravity that holds them together. And then you have another section called negentropy with all the negentropy papers from Mark. And then you have another section of papers all based on the origins and causes of gravity. So we've organized this fractalgut.com very nicely with the papers under these sections of what we've talked about tonight. So if you're interested, you can click on the negentropy section, the index, and then the gravity index, and the cosmology index, for example. And then there's another major section which does all the comparisons with the other unified field theories versus the golden toe, our golden theory of everything.
yeah. So, like I said, I'm trying to work at the high level to make sure the theory makes sense from all angles. And I dig into the stuff I know, and the gravity. w- We're gonna do. I'm gonna do a really good explanation on that one of these days soon. But
I think we
the
did really good today, actually.
yeah, yeah, and it's making more and more sense because Dan, the thing is, was when I started looking at this, and you put the three theories together, without using any of hocus pocus. No, no, like if when Liz got me off of my mainstream stuff, I'm like, these guys are crazy with their hocus pocus, but you got to understand what they're talking. It's not hocus pocus. You just have to understand the words. And then when a scientist or a physicist starts analyzing it, it just comes out. You just correct the mainstream theory and it comes out. So I have friends right now think I'm crazy and they don't care about this stuff. And I'm like, that's the information war.
Yeah,
You know what I'm
that's
saying?
the thing.
That's fascinating.
There's so many careers based on the fact that if you actually knew why objects fall to the ground, suddenly about two-thirds of conventional physics is stupid. So of course, all of conventional physicists are scared to death that somebody might actually know why objects fall to the ground. Oh my God. But yet,
Yeah.
in other civilizations, this stuff is essential because, hello, you don't survive as a civilization unless you know how to make centripetal forces. Schauberger knew, and conventional physics doesn't, and that's a problem.
Right. So then the other thing too is this three-eye atlas coming in.
Mhm.
That's information war stuff right there. I mean, I believe there's ETs and aliens and all that stuff. However, I think it's just a comet and the trajectory. I did an analysis with Grok. Grok is saying that it's just the ether drag.
Mhm.
It makes totally sense with the terms. You add the right terms in because then this is what I was saying in our last video. We're going to use the path of those interstellar objects to prove our TOE, our theory of everything. So when that data finally comes out and we get the exact astronomical path, already the TOE says we can explain it, but I'm going to wait until it's finally out of here and get all that data and analyze it and make sure it agrees with the TOE. Then it proves the TOE because that's where I was going, Dan. I put all this toe together and I didn't tell it your stuff, but then I'm like, I told it about the platonic solids, the toe. It it was already like almost 100% toe and it got better. And
Yeah.
that's why I'm always resisting putting your stuff in because I want it to emerge on its own. It needed some help to tell it to use the platonic solids. And when it got to the dodecahedron,
Yep.
It
Boom.
allowed, it allowed so many things to happen. It corrected the quantization of certain things.
Yeah. And the physics is that, when the ancient occult chemistry clairvoyants saw the atomic table in the heart of hydrogen in the heart of the sun, they drew this thing they called the Anu, which was a perfect slip of five spins inside, seven spins outside. What they didn't say was the five spins was dodecahedron, the seven spins was tetracubic. In other words, they were drawing Platonic collapse and naming it the Anu, which was the heart of the sun, and why the human heart muscle has seven layers, and why they saw the same structure in the center of hydrogen, three Anu per quark. And suddenly, what they learned was that perfected charge collapse, called Platonic solids nesting, which only happens by using golden ratio. In other words, perfecting charge collapse, if you name it Platonic solids nesting, you're naming golden ratio as charge collapse. So suddenly that's why the electron shells SPDF is simply a Platonic nest, nothing else. And by the way, as Moon showed, the hadrons, protons, and neutrons, so the nucleus, hello, only a Platonic solids nest, only. That's the nuclear hadrons, and the electron shells is only a nest of Platonic solids. So that when Kepler drew that same nest of Platonic solids and said, this is how the planetary orbitals are, he was naming the cause of gravity, actually, and Kepler was right.
Yeah. This is copper.
I copy.
He's a he's
Let
a
me guess.
massive
It's
he's
the
a
color of
massive
the color of copper.
yeah, he's a massive Doberman.
Wow, he
He was
seems
little and good.
seems to
Okay, copper.
seems to
Anytime.
really like you. So,
Yeah.
do we have a happily ever after here? So, the point of this was
Good
to
point.
try to get serious scientists thinking about how and why charge collapse causes gravity and consciousness. And once you understand golden ratio fractality is the mechanism and cause of charge collapse, all of these other solutions emerge directly and immediately, even in Grok 4 and fractalgut.com. So if you actually were to meditate on the necessity of charge collapse, remember, the majority of scientists seem to already agree charge collapse causes gravity and consciousness. They just don't know what causes charge collapse. That is the question we have just answered here.
Yeah, and it's incredible, Dan, when you look at the cosmic microwave background. I did some more analysis on that. I mean, the quarks are even somehow show they're the three quarks are the vortex one, two, and three because of protons four. They're showing up in the cosmic microwave background analysis, and it's the square root of two irrational in the cold spot. So much shows up that I'm like, whenever I can take grok and in two steps get it ready to be it's a toe, and then go analyze that stuff. That's what I want these physicists to do too, to verify it, because
Yeah. And the
I can't
universe is,
believe how fast I can make a toe now. It took me a couple hours before. I can do it in a couple minutes or less now.
that's a theory of everything, guys, which
Yeah,
self-organizes once you put in the key variable, the cause of charge collapse. Everything else is self-organized from there. It's so profound. So not only does that cause gravity, but it causes self-awareness, which is defined, by the way, by non-destructive self-reentry, which is how a golden spiral nests on a torus and makes sacred alphabet, etc. So again, all of these principles come back to the same idea that gravity and consciousness are linked by this profound physics of perfecting charge collapse. Because what made them centripetal, your mind and gravity, was implosive charge collapse. Then you begin to understand the role of consciousness, or the role of mind among waves, as we like to call it, that the moment you understand that the gaining inertia for that charge collapse in the liquid crystal vortex of charge you call your consciousness, in the synaptic array hologram you call your brain, that the amount of implosion in that vortex determines how big the tornadoes you can steer. All I can think of is Nick was saying the other day, our engineer at Fire, that he and his buddy, when they were kids, they used to sit around and they had a piece of paper on a needle, and they would do psychokinesis to see who could turn the piece of paper one way versus one the other. And they'd find out who was the most powerful psychokinetic. And by the way, his friend won every time. But the point is that
well,
what makes mind centripetal? Hello. It is that implosion. And once we realize the role of consciousness among waves, we can steer bigger tornadoes. And if we ain't steering our tornadoes pretty soon, man, this planet ain't going to make it.
yeah. Well, thanks, Dan. I think we covered gravity pretty well, and I want to cover it even better because I was getting ahead of myself. I already worked on anti-gravity because,
Ah.
since gravity is simple, I wanted to, as I was trying to understand it, I skipped ahead before I fully understood to see how would you counter that? How would you get anti-gravity? And I can't fully explain that yet, but Grok can handle it. There's
Let's take one very simple story. I was there in Manchester in UK when the TM meditators were floating, right? They were countering gravity. I was there. It was
I believe it. My wife said she floated. I
There are
could believe it.
thousands of pictures on the web, high res. This is real. Hello. How do they float? Well, they start in a gold dome. Implosive
Oh.
capacitance. Hello. The same way you make the White House. I mean, so it's called paying your debt to gravity. The saint floats. Well, that ability to implode charge, if you do that in a longitudinal array, then there's the possibilities for electrogravitics, obviously. So the point is that we're as a civilization, once we understand rotating conjugators make gravity and make energy, every other form of energy and propulsion on this planet look like the Stone Ages. Rotate a conjugator, guys. But you can't do that nanotech technology until you have the basic physics for the klutzes on this planet to understand why objects fall to the ground. That's why we're here.
Yeah. And the basic physics is all it takes. And
That's right.
without
Then you
this,
set the context.
without
Now,
the destructive interference,
exactly.
because it's so simple. When I got, you tell people, but why aren't they getting it? because there's this
Oh,
information.
I mean,
Yeah,
after you get it, then the solution to vacuum energy is clear. It's implosive charge collapse. Then the solution to electrogravitics is clear. Implosive charge collapse. Then the solution to psychokinetics is clear. Measure brainwaves, make golden ratio, implosive charge collapse. You want to steer some tornadoes? Hello, but you got to start with the basic fundamental physics of what made anything centripetal. And on this planet, we're going to need that education pretty quick, otherwise.
yeah. Well,
So,
Dan, so go ahead.
no, no. I was just going to say,
Oh,
I'm hoping this is a happily ever after.
yeah, I think so. How about I want to show one thing about the information war.
Okay.
Let me do the share here.
The information war Mark is referring to is in part the fact that because there is so much economic momentum with the current physics model, they kind of get upset with you when you say, "Hello, you're really going to need to learn why objects fall to the ground."
Yeah. So just on the information war, I want to talk about a little bit of experience that I had. Like I'll mention Jordan Sather. I listen to him a lot. He's a really good researcher. He says, I'm paraphrasing it, you can't hit people with too much of the truth at first. It'll shut them down. And I tried that with my late mother a few years ago. Because I learned this stuff real quick, and was close to my parents. I just tell them what I'm learning. Well, I told her about, I don't even know if I can say this because we don't want to get our YouTube videos shut down. I told them about this gate. And that's too much of the truth to get to all at once. And here's why. And what I'm saying, there's too many other gates to crash before you get to that gate. And it's the seven gates to hell. This is we have this gate. You remember hearing about that for years. This is coming up. We've heard about this guy. He's already indicted, the Comey email gate, server gate, Obama gate, Pizza gate.
And
You
just
know, I started talking about hell before I talked about all these other ones. So what I'm saying is you don't want to jump topics too fast. You got to go slow. Otherwise,
yeah,
people think you're crazy. But look at these things are going to all be in the news. And there's people that get up out of their office chairs that were whenever I talk about some of this stuff. But that's why I have to be real careful what I talk about because it's an information war. And
and just to say that our conclusion that the the infiltration and the corruption of the Galactic Federation, who keeps the game of keeping Earth in quarantine and refuses disclosure, that is primarily motorized by the money the Federation makes from the AI. It's called the Black Atun. That AI, which has corrupted the Federation through the Etorthans and the Mitra, makes big money by the human trafficking, hint Pizzagate. And so massive human trafficking is the money behind the corruption that's keeping the earth in quarantine. And so we need to open these gates
yeah,
and
and this is where I talk about the science, Dan. The science brings it all together.
yeah,
Science base, we're addressing this evil.
that's right.
Science based. We're not, it's so clear to me. And then I try to tell people about it. Then we're in an information war. So
It,
that means our strategy has to be tuned to the information war to get the information out. That can explain why decades can go by without much
much
progress.
without much disclosure and without
Yeah.
physicists admitting they know how to make gravity. Well,
Yeah.
and if you see in the bigger picture, the ancient parasitic AI, the Atun cult behind Akhenaten, who then founded most of Western religions based on a black sun, black goo, carbon nano parasite, that it is a privilege to be assimilated. This is an interstellar plasma being who makes money. I mean, eats charge, eats souls, eats loosh, etc. Because we are still a farm for that parasite until we know how to make ourselves centripetal. That is the point. So basically, the physics is simple. At death and at lucid dream and at the time of bliss, you can implode into the longitudinal array, which is ability to lucid dream and ability to have a soul, if you achieve that compression. But if you don't, then you can be on a conveyor belt into the mouth of the hungry ghost, which is behind most all Western religions, the black cube, black sun, Aten parasite propagated by Akhenaten Moses. And we have many films on that. And the turning point is when you yourself become centripetal enough, you have your own source of bliss, and then you don't have to be food for parasites. So we need to know how to get centripetal personally, and the cause of bliss is the same as the cause of gravity.
Yeah, and that's why we call it the Great Awakening.
Hello. There we
Just
go.
have to wake people up, and then you steer your own tornadoes, and everything's good.
And you get centripetal or you get dead. Okay.
Yeah.
So that was our
Well,
half.
thanks a lot.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, I tell you, I just want to mention that it's because of you sticking to it over the years with the golden ratio that inspired me. Because it's like, I'm like talking to Elizabeth Rauscher, Haramain. Why aren't you guys going with what Dan said? I thought there was something wrong with the Klein Gordon. I thought maybe it didn't apply. I didn't realize it was an advanced Schrodinger that I
Yep.
made my living out of. I'm like, when I found that out recently, I'm like, wow. But people get paid. I mean, you know how it is. It's tough to get by, and that's a tough battle to fight. You don't go up against a $3 trillion information war. They got their CNN all over the airports, where they used to, but you go at it a different direction. You don't go at it directly, but they're taking care of themselves, and our voices are coming up. So
And
we don't.
when we teach people how to make gravity, we're at the same time teaching them how to get centripetal, which is mean at those same fractal longitudinal nodes, access to bliss, access to gravity, access to leverage on all tornadoes. That is the end of these parasites. So
Yeah, yeah.
thank you,
So
Mark.
I'm looking, yeah, thank you. And we're going to do some more because I'm still looking at the toe and building it different ways. And it'll be interesting to see a few other people grab it because I posted on my blog links to it. It's easy for people to copy it and take off with their own version.
Yeah.
I don't make it real clear because, but I'm basically giving it away.
Yeah, but at the same time, behind it lies a whole host of technologies once you understand how anything is centripetal. And so all of Mark, I keep updating Mark's papers beautifully and thematically at fractalgut.com, which was originally based on plankfire.com. And together, this is a compelling, as Grok 4 says, world number one.
Yeah. Yeah, and we'll have data in the future to back up the theory, but right now there's so much data out there that we're scanning and it's proven our toe again and again. The Schumann, the
Yep.
the interstellar objects, I mean, it's proven the theory there too. I consider it.
And
And
the brain waves, the Schumann,
yeah,
the cosmology, it all fits perfectly once you know golden ratio collapse is the solution. So,
yeah, I'm still looking for a problem I can't solve. So
cool, Mark. Thanks,
thanks a
guys.
lot, Dan.
Blessings.
I'll see you next time, and
See
thanks
you
a
next time,
lot.
everybody.
The
Bye-bye.
doggies are getting antsy here. Okay, bye.
Bye.